Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm on today with Dave Woetzel, and he runs the website Genesis Park, which I'll let him explain what it does and also some of his background. So go ahead.
Well, hello, Jackson. Great to be with you this afternoon. At least it's afternoon for me here. Welcome to our Genesis Park overview that we're going to do this afternoon. Excited to tell you a little bit about Genesis Park, the website, some of the expeditions. I have had opportunity to be to some pretty strange places all over the world looking for potential living dinosaurs. Give a little bit of my background for the folks that are unfamiliar with Genesis Park, and for me, Dino Dave, I have a bachelor's degree in physics engineering, and I have a master's degree in biology from Clemson University. I ran a business for 25 years in the high-tech world, which I then sold, and for the last few years, I've been pursuing research, writing. I wrote a book called Chronicles of Dinosauria. I'll put a little plug in for the book. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I got some light shining on it. How's that? Is that better? And you can pick it up at Books A Million, ChristianBook.com, various places out there. It's called Chronicles of Dinosauria, the story of dinosaurs and man from creation to cryptozoology. I live in Concord, New Hampshire, which is just a little bit north of Boston. It's cold and snowy here right now. We've had a couple weeks plus of single digits. Just the last couple of days, we've had a bit of a break in that, but it's been pretty cold, snowy winter. So good excuse to look to go someplace warm on expedition.
Exactly. You can come down here. It was warm until yesterday.
You got to find me a dinosaur, though. I don't want to go just for the warmth. I want to find a dinosaur.
Well, we've got these alligators down here. I think they might qualify, some of them.
No. You get a whole different order within the class Reptilia going on there.
Indeed, you do. Do you consider birds dinosaurs?
I don't. If you look at the higher taxa, really everything above a species is kind of an arbitrary definition. It's just what we've agreed on. But the premise is that a theropod dinosaur evolved feathers, evolved the ability to fly, and that became the ancestor of the birds. If you want to make some kind of a super category like archosaurs, I certainly have a problem with it, but I don't buy into the evolutionary theory of how dinosaurs evolved into birds. No, I don't.
Is there scientific reasons you would say for not thinking that birds are dinosaurs?
Well, this is probably a good starting place. When we start talking about the evidence that men and dinosaurs coexisted, and by that I mean, the large reptiles, Saurischia, Ornithischia. If we want to speak in a popular sense, we could even say dinosaurians in a non-rigorous sense would include the pterosaurs, the great flying reptiles, maybe the plesiosaurs, the swimming reptiles. Technically, scientifically, dinosaurs are the walking reptiles, right? So the pterosaurs, again, like your crocodiles, are a whole nother order of large reptiles that many believe to be extinct. I tend to doubt that they're extinct, but something like this Dimorphodon, which would be a non-pterodactyloid pterosaur, or something, of course, like the dinosaur proper here. This is a Diplodocus, and this is something like what we look for in equatorial Africa. But these types of creatures, I believe, were created as distinct kinds. As a creationist, I believe God made the whole world in 6 literal days. God made dinosaurs, God made alligators, crocodilians, God made birds, God made all these different kinds distinct. That doesn't mean they can't change, they can't morph through time. But if as a fundamental, you take the Bible as God's word, and that's really what a Christian is. A Christian, Jackson, you may know this, but some of your viewers might not, but a Christian is someone that has taken this book, the Bible, as God's word, as absolute truth. They've looked through the propositions, the truth propositions in this book, largely the truth propositions by Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, that he lived a sinless life, that he died a sacrificial death on the cross for our sins, that he was buried, and that he rose again 3 days later. A Christian is someone that takes those truth propositions and accepts them, accepts this book as God's word, as God's literal truth. And so when we read, for example, in God's word in Exodus 20, verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord God made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day, the straightforward understanding of that would be that men and dinosaurs were created in that first week, side by side, and have coexisted throughout history. That doesn't mean things can't go extinct. But there just isn't room in a straightforward reading of God's word for millions and millions of years of slow and gradual evolution of lots of bad mutations and occasionally a good mutation, and slowly, gradually, natural selection being able to pick amongst those to get from one kind of a beautifully designed creature like a theropod dinosaur, like this Spinosaurus that I'm holding here. I know this is not the exact kind evolutionists think evolved into birds, but here's a theropod dinosaur, a marvelous, specifically designed creature in its own right, compared to a bird, say Archaeopteryx, or say a modern day parrot or whatever. Again, a marvelous example of design that's all uniquely created to fly. So as a creationist, I would say, no, the creatures like dinosaurs and birds were created by God right from the beginning, with lots of capacity to vary and change over time, to adjust to various ecosystems. And we've seen that, we've observed that, but we've never observed new information being added into a genetic system whereby it could be the foundation of some kind of a novelty, like eyeballs or feathers or sonar in bats, that type of thing.
Okay, so you would say it's possible for organisms to adapt to their specific ecological niche, and that you would say they are able to develop structures or novel traits based on the environmental pressures, correct?
Well, when you say develop structures or novel traits, I believe that God, the creator, built into each of the various kinds of organisms a tremendous capacity for variation. And we're finding out some of these things are actually turned on by the environment. Certain epigenetic activities can be triggered by the environment itself. And so we don't completely understand how all these mechanisms work yet. But again, this is built-in information that can be expressed based on various things, maybe a genetic bottleneck, or perhaps the lack of finding a mate, or perhaps going through some environmental difficulty or stress. And so some of these things might be expressed, but it's all built-in information. In other words, it's not changing the creature into a different kind of creature, and it's not adding new information. It's just expressing information that was already there.
Okay. What I want to do, I want to get back to the bird thing, and then we'll talk about kinds, and then we can get to the Tapram expedition that you went on.
Yeah, we probably should talk about dinosaurs, since that's kind of my specialty. Right. In the broader origins debate, the creation evolution debate, I'm Dino Dave, and I do speak on origins, and I have a biology degree, but my specialty really is dinosaurs. This Genesis Park, I put in a plug for the website, www.genesispark.com, and our premise is dinosaurs are living evidence of a powerful creator.
Okay, so back to the birds. What are your thoughts on using the concept that birds evolved from dinosaurs to make verifiable predictions about fossils?
Well, there's millions and millions of fossils out there, and occasionally you're going to find amongst any large assemblage, whether it's marbles or whether it's sands on the seashore or whether it's fossils, some that fit in between others. And so the evolutionists will use that as a story to say, well, we think this animal evolved into this kind of animal, and here's this one in between that we find, and so we believe that proves our point. And of course, sometimes the ones that are in between or show similar traits don't fit the evolutionary story. And so then the evolutionists call that convergent evolution. So you have a trait like eyeballs that supposedly, I mean, it's ridiculous enough to think it evolved once, but evolutionists have to believe it evolved, a dozen or more times in all different lineages. Something like sonar, which is in bats, but it's also in porpoises and whales. Again, it had to evolve multiple times. So when a fossil kind of fits the story, well, then it's called a transitional form, and it proves the common ancestry story. If it doesn't fit it, well, then it's convergent evolution. I would say that with a large assembly, you're going to find some birds that have features that are closer, like an Archaeopteryx with its claws on its wings and its true tail and its teeth in its beak, which are closer in form to a reptile. But I would say there's significant and major differences between birds and theropod dinosaurs. Again, I don't want to go too far into the bird dinosaur thing. I'd like to speak on some of the evidence men and dinosaurs coexisted, but my position would be no, they're distinctly different. And one of the basic problems for evolutionists is we find fully formed birds in the rock layers right alongside the dinosaurs. I mean, parrots, ducks, loons, albatross, cormorants, sandpipers, avocets is all found right alongside dinosaurs. And so how on earth are you going to have slow, agonizing, gradual transformation from a theropod dinosaur into the first proto-bird, proto-aves, which will then diversify to all these more distinct and finely tuned, more evolved birds like we see today, like the ones I just mentioned. And yet all the ones I mentioned are found buried alongside the dinosaurs that are supposed to then evolve into the proto-bird. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, first, the more fully formed birds, as you call it, parrots, avocets, etc., they're all found in Cretaceous strata, and specifically later Cretaceous strata. They're not found in, for instance, late Jurassic strata, which is where we find Archaeopteryx and Anchiornis and Aurornis. But what I was trying to get at with the power of the dinosaur bird connection is that, for instance, in 1915, you had a paleontologist named William Beebe who saw that based on the embryology of birds, would find a dinosaur with a bird-like ancestor with asymmetrical flight feathers on his front and back limbs. And so in 2003, we did finally find this organism. It's not a bird ancestor, but we found Microraptor. Microraptor gyi, I think, is the species name, which has the features predicted by Beebe. Now that was kind of a good prediction, but it wasn't nearly as precise as the prediction for, say, Tiktaalik. The prediction for Tiktaalik by Neil Shubin and colleagues in the late 90s said we should expect to find a fish with tetrapod characteristics in this specific strata, which was in Arctic Canada, an area of Arctic Canada. And so they went there. They predicted they should find a fish with tetrapod characteristics in a specific strata. They went there and they found it after about 5 years of digging. And so one of the things I think is so compelling about evolution is that it has a predictive power. And I think that any good theory should have a predictive power. So based on creation, on the creation story, we should be able to make predictions about organisms, wouldn't you say?
There certainly should be some. Now we can talk about the fishopods, and we can talk about some of the problems with Tiktaalik. Maybe that would be a good conversation for another day. I
Okay.
would
Yeah.
say to make a prediction that these fissiopods that have some of these mosaic characteristics would be found in a particular layer, which is a transitional layer, which I believe formed during the flood, isn't necessarily a prediction of evolution. It's something that creationists could make as well. I believe these various layers of rock are different ecosystems that were preserved, some of them closer to the marine environment, some of them transitional environments, some of them swamp environments like the Mesozoic strata, some of them higher up where most of the mammals are found. And I think that's a prediction creationists could make as well. So it's really a prediction of a particular type of creature within a particular type of a ecosystem that in the rock layers. That's not necessarily a time-dependent thing. I believe the flood formed the whole of the fossil record, or the great bulk of it, depending on where you are in the world, in short order within that 1 year.
Well, they were predicting based on a specific time period. This strata they were looking for was Devonian strata, and as in the Devonian period, Canada was closer to the equator, so it was very swampy, and so they weren't going to say the Badlands in Montana and looking for a fishapod like Tiktaalik. They were going to a place that they knew had been near the equator previously, and that contains other Devonian organisms that fit the evolutionary model, story, whatever you want to call it, that we have so far. And this was a verified prediction of that.
Well,
But
again, we can spend a lot of time on it, but I would say
right.
creationists could make that same prediction. I have no problem with it. It fits nicely within the creation model that strata wouldn't be a time frame. In other words, a Devonian millions of years ago time frame. It would be a particular ecosystem that was preserved intact in the flood. So again, we can talk about it. I've got significant problems with Tiktaalik as a transitional fossil, and not just me, but a lot of evolutionists do too. We've got clear tetrapod footprints in rock layers that the evolutionists would say would be millions of years before that. So it's not a good transitional fossil.
Well, they're actually not clear tetrapod tracks. If you look at the tracks, there are actually numerous notes on the original paper, which was by a was it Polish scientist? Or no, the tracks were Polish. I don't remember who published the paper, but the tracks themselves could have actually been made by a modified fin. Since we have no record of the organism itself that left the fossil, or that left the tracks, we have no idea how derived it was. I mean, is it possible that it was a tetrapod that we just haven't found the fossils for? Well, absolutely. It is possible. It's possible we're wrong on Canichthyes being the first or the earliest eotetrapodomorph, and the other guys coming along later with successively more characteristics. Yeah, it's possible we're wrong about that, but as of right now, that's very tenuous evidence. But I do have to say I agree with you when we could spend all day talking about the fishopods and whatnot. But I asked you more to come here about your you went to Top Prom recently in Cambodia, and so would you like to explain to the audience your expedition there?
Sure. Again, going back to the evidences that man and dinosaurs coexisted, I discussed the scriptural evidence, and we don't just have the actual statements of the Bible that God made everything in the 6-day window of the creation week, but we also have creatures that are there, like in Job 40, the behemoth and the Leviathan and the fiery flying serpent, which is mentioned in Isaiah. And so we've got some of these unique animals. So I would say the scripture is one key evidence that man and dinosaurs coexisted. But then we also have the historical record. That is lots of independent civilizations that didn't communicate, as far as we know about this, have these traditions, these stories, these legends of dragons. And some of them are kind of fanciful and embellished, and like legends are over the years. But oftentimes in legends, there is a kernel of truth that points back to something. And when we have actual artifacts, depictions, carvings, engravings, statues, this becomes even more compelling. And so when, for example, you look at Tapram, which is a large temple complex that's created there in what's now the jungles area of Cambodia, but was once a center of the Khmer civilization. And you look at Tapram and you see engraved in the wall a creature that looks like a Stegosaurus. That is one data point, but it's a pretty compelling data point that men actually saw the great reptiles.
Okay. So is it interesting at all that the stegosaur or stegosaur-esque carving at Tapram is completely anatomically inaccurate, as opposed to all the other drawings in Tapram that are anatomically accurate?
Well, first off, I wouldn't say that all are anatomically accurate, but we do have quite a number of the elephants and horses and
cranes and water buffalo.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Water buffalo is another one that are very close. And I would say that there is a possibility that the artist hadn't actually had a firsthand encounter with a stegosaurus. That's one possibility. But I would say that the stegosaurus carving, particularly the second stegosaurus carving that we discovered in the temple portico, is quite accurate. And the one that's been more familiar and that's been published out there extensively is also very compelling.
Well, it's just that when you look at the online pictures of the stegosaur carving, it lacks a lot of features of stegosaurs that we know from the fossil record. Also adds a number of features that reptiles don't have. Or as for lacking, it lacks the thagomizer tail that stegosaurs have, which, if anyone doesn't know, the thagomizer is the spikes on the tail. It also has a tail that droops on the ground like mammals do, as opposed to the erect tail that a stegosaur would have had, which would have extended horizontally instead of drooping on the ground, which is what we used to think. History lesson for anyone who doesn't know. We used to think stegosaurs and apatosaurs and T-Rexes all drag their tails on the ground, and as it turns out, they can't do that because, as we learn more about their anatomy, they would have had to walk with their tails extended up in the air to balance their weight.
And on many of the trackways where we've seen dinosaur trackways, we don't see tail dragging, which is a pretty good indication that they carry their tail erect. This is probably not even a real good example. The Spinosaurus might be a better example there, but that can show a little bit of the difference to your viewers there. And so the creature shows its tail. I would say drooping is probably inaccurate. We could probably agree on that. I wouldn't say it's dragging it, but it does tend to hang a little lower than folks, as a rule today, think that they probably did. I'm not troubled by that. Fact is, they could have probably dragged it on occasion if they wanted to. And again, we're more likely dealing with somebody who's heard reports of it, or maybe seen some depiction of it and then carved it in the rock. The artist probably wasn't the one that was having a personal interaction with these fairly rare creatures.
Okay. So the person who described it.
Hang on, Jackson, sorry to interrupt, but let's go back and talk about the spikes for just a minute. If you look, as I did, around Tapram, you'll see a number of elephants, and none of the elephants have tusks. Why is that? Well, the Asian elephants don't always have tusks, unlike the African elephants, but they do. They've certainly been known for it, and it'd be kind of neat to show one with tusks, one would think. But if you look at domesticated elephants, even still today throughout the East, they will chop off the tusks because they're a danger, they're a hazard. So if you have one of these creatures that you brought into captivity, a stegosaurus, a dragon, then what's the first thing you're going to do? Is you're going to take those spikes and take it off before they take someone's stomach out. I mean, that would be a major danger point. And obviously they still could cause some problem just whacking you with their tail, but for sure you want to cut off those spikes. So I would suggest that just like we would, take off the claws on some cats today or defang snakes, they would have chopped off those spikes. And so that doesn't bother me the least bit that they don't have spikes on their tail.
I mean, those spikes were bone. A cat's claws are they're keratinized dermis. I mean, there's kind of a big difference between. I agree. Yeah, cutting off elephant tusk is also horrible. And if anyone owns an elephant, don't do that. That is their teeth.
No, we're not talking about the ethics of this. We're just talking about the reality of what happens.
Right. I don't know. I guess. I mean, I'm still a bit concerned that and it's not just the tail itself. The other part of the stegosaur is, well, its head. The head is also very anatomically inaccurate. The head is gigantic compared to the body. We know from stegosaurs they have one of the smallest brain cases
about the size of a walnut.
Yeah, exactly, of any dinosaurs. And so this is more of a mammalian. The traits presented on this picture are more mammalian. The tail droops, the head is large. The what else was it? The ears. It has gigantic ears, like a rhino or a pig. And what you notice is and so one of the most interesting things about it is the spikes. Of course, the back plates make it look like it is a stegosaur. It's got these huge back plates on it. But if you look at a lot of the pictures, a lot of the reliefs in Top Prom, a lot of them have these kind of plates behind them, like the crane, like a crane or a water buffalo, indicating that these aren't plates; they're leaves. It's because Top Prom is in the jungle, and so these animals on these reliefs are against a leafy background. And so if you take away the plates or leaves, it looks a lot more like a rhinoceros, like a Javan rhinoceros, or Sumatran, whatever it is in the area. And so it looks.
Well, let's talk about that. You raised a couple objections. Let's talk about the head, and let's talk about the plates slash leaves. I guess we'll start with the leaves. One of the key reasons why I went to Cambodia several months back now, is I wanted to actually do some rigorous measurements. And so I went all around to Prom and I looked at the various depictions, many of them in circles, and they do have leaf work around them. I don't know that that's because it's jungle, because it wouldn't have been jungle at that time. I mean, they would have had that whole place very cleared, and now the jungle's taken over. So I'm not sure that was why. I think it was just ornamentation, but they do have a lot of leaf work. Mm-hmm. And a couple of good examples of it are right below and above the water buffalo, and right there with the stegosaurus. And without exception, what I found by measuring the depth, when you deal with relief, a lot of times the artist is trying to bring to the foreground the things that are important, and then he kind of sets off into the background with things that are more decorative elements or perhaps environmental elements. And so you see very slightly off the background all of these leaves in the water buffalo and the other creatures. There's some horse creatures and others. Whereas in these pieces that go down and follow the contour of the back of the stegosaurus, it's brought right to the foreground, almost just barely less in its relief from the actual body of the creature. And so when you're looking at it from the top, they look stubby. They don't come to a point. They look very stubby because they're far off of the background, trying to bring it out. And so, no, I don't at all believe that their background, they're very different from any other background. I think the artists, for good, bad, or indifferent, was clearly trying to depict it as part of the creature. Now let's talk about the head for a second. The head is ridiculously big for a stegosaurus. And there is this kind of odd, I don't think ear is a good description. It doesn't look like any kind of a good ear, but it does come up kind of at a triangle shape that's coming off of the head. And my belief is there's two things. Number one, this creature, again, is designed for a domestic setting. And we have stories, and we also have artistic depictions of the Chinese domesticating dragons and the emperor using them as a novelty to pull his chariot. And we can go into the various historical works of that. And you know, if your viewers want to, they can go out on my website and I actually have an article which talks about the Stegosaurus of Taprom. And if they go out genesispark.com and click on some of the top link there for some of the, make sure I get this exactly right. It's called, essays. If they click on essays, that would be the place. And then go down from there and you'll see the Stegosaurus of Taprom. And there I've got these, this article, and it actually shows some of these pictures, and I cite these historical references. But yeah, if these historical references are to be believed, there were some surviving dragons, maybe not even in Cambodia, maybe in China. And the Chinese had this interaction that was going on back and forth with the Khmer Empire. We know that because the primary chronicler of the Khmer Empire, we get most of our current knowledge of it, was actually a Chinese that came there and settled and kept some good records. And so there was this interaction. So probably this was really a Chinese creature that was domesticated, and reports came back to Cambodia. It could have been Cambodian, it's just speculation. But what we do know is that there's something that looks an awful lot like a muzzle that's on the head of this creature, and an awful lot like the attachment place of reins coming off the sides. And there's a, it's just really an odd little feature coming up the side. And to me, it speaks very clearly of exactly what the Chinese say, is this creature was domesticated, was used as a novelty to pull perhaps carts, chariots. And again, the article describes in great detail a second Stegosaurus carving, which is in the left portico of the same temple, Taprom. And in this case, it's got the proper, very narrow Stegosaurus head. And you say, well, why is that? Well, the one that's in the temple portico has what looks like a halter strap around it, like as if it was being tied down somewhere. It was kind of off duty, if you will. And so the muzzle is taken off, and that whole harness, where the reins would attach, is taken off. And so the strap instead was on, and it was merely tethered. So I think it really ties together quite well. The evidence of the Chinese stories, the Chinese pictures, the interaction with the Khmer civilization, the fact that you've got this one Stegosaurus that shows the narrow head and a tether, and the other Stegosaurus that has this large muzzle apparatus that's on it, which has the reins coming off, and the fact that the spikes have been cut off. It all fits quite nicely with a domesticated dragon that was known at the time of the Khmer Empire there in Cambodia.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'm gonna put up the Stegosaurus so people can see. This is what I had it up there, but I took it down. So like,
that's all right. We probably should move on. Our time is rapidly waning here, and I know there's some other things we can talk about.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so so one of the other things. Here you go, people. This is the this is the top problem stegosaur right here in the middle. Okay, so one of the other
it's got big anatomical problems, but I show this to young people in high school and grade school, and I do camps and I do talks in colleges, and folks look at it and say, bingo, stegosaurus. So I think the guy did a pretty good job.
Well, as someone who has read quite a few books on the anatomy of dinosaurs, and I've talked to other people who also read a lot about or are tetrapod zoologists, and they're not convinced by the. They have no problem if there were in fact a dinosaur living today or a non-avian dinosaur living today, but they just look at it and they say, no, sorry. The other thing, let's see. I read one of your articles. I read several of your articles, but one of the other ones I read was modern fossils with dinosaurs. Would you like
Right.
to explain that one?
Um,
Or is
this,
there one in particular you want to talk about, like the
yeah,
ecosystem?
I don't think that would be the name of the article. Uh, Again, going back to some of our main evidence is that men and dinosaur coexisted. Okay, we have the
Okay.
biblical evidence, we have the historical evidence, all these reports and stories from many different cultures about dragons. The Stegosaurus in Cambodia is only one data point. Again, I think it's a pretty compelling one. But if you look at the Ica stones, there's a stone of these stones are found in southern Peru in the Okapi Desert. And these graves are people from the Ica, but also from the Nazca and the Paracas and these different tribal peoples that lived there before the Inca Empire more or less squashed them all and homogenized many of the technologies and people groups. But here, I don't know, it's hard for me to see if I've got an angle good on that there for you to see that, Jackson. But I mean, this is just a replica. I do have some originals, but my originals, they use bas relief as opposed to this one is blackened and has the engraved, which makes it a little bit easier maybe for the camera to see, at least I hope. But these are more depictions. And again, this is just a couple of data points, but literally we've got hundreds of these at the Genesis Park website. I've got, a large assemblage of these. And when you start looking at all these different cultures and all these different depictions, to think that, okay, I believe the Stegosaurus in Cambodia is a great evidence that men and dinosaurs coexisted. All right, maybe I'm wrong on that one. Well, what about the Ica stones? Or what about the Combro figurines? Or what about, on and on and on and on, all these different ones? It becomes compelling when you start looking at the vast amount of data points of evidence in historical, in artistic, in some of these engravings, these burial stones, that men and dinosaurs coexisted. But then also we have the paleontological evidence, and this might be what you were alluding to a minute ago, where we have human elements either at the same level as the dinosaurs, like the London artifact where a hammer was found in Cretaceous rock, that is rock from the time of the dinosaurs in that same rock layer down in the Paluxy River area there. And then also in Glen Rose, that same area, we have human footprints and dinosaur tracks in the same rock layer. So that's pretty compelling. But I actually have something here that's pretty special with me today that I'd like to show your viewers, Jackson.
Okay.
This is a pretty special artifact here. This is a bell, and I'm going to open this up here and get it out. This is a bell that was discovered by a guy by the name of Newton Anderson. Newton Anderson was a teenager, and he lived in West Virginia. And where he lived there, they burned with coal. It's probably still do today, but everybody burned with coal. And so one of his jobs was to bank coal furnace. And so as a young man, he'd go down in the basement and he'd get a chunk of coal and he'd throw it on the furnace and keep the furnace going. And one night he went down there, and this is 1944, if I remember right. And he went down there, and remember, this is World War II time frame. And he got this chunk of coal and he went to put it into the coal furnace, and it fell, it landed on the floor and cracked in half. And he noticed sticking out of one half of it, this metal, elongated thing. And he thought it was a gun. Well, he's a teenager, he's got guns on the mind, it's World War II time frame. And he said, that looks interesting. I'm going to set that aside, check it out tomorrow, put the other half of it on the fire. The next day he went down with a croquet mallet. He banged and knocked at this piece of coal, this chunk of coal, and extracted this bell. So here you have a human artifact, unless there was a bellosaurus running around making bells that we're not familiar with. We have a human artifact that's found in a carboniferous layer. I mean, this is 300 million years ago, roughly, give or take. This before the dinosaurs even evolved. Dinosaurs 200 million years ago to roughly 60 million years ago in the evolutionary time scale. Again, give or take, but this would be well before the dinosaurs even evolved. And yet we have a bell. It gets even a little bit more interesting. This bell was tested at the University of Oklahoma, and it's come to find out it's a bronze bell with an iron clapper. The clapper is a little thing in there that makes a ding noise, and the bell actually still rings. And so here you have a bronze outer works and an iron clapper. And if you read in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, the Bible says that Tubal-Cain was an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. That was the two metals that they were using in the pre-flood world. So from a creationist perspective, this is great. I mean, this is a pre-flood artifact. It's an antediluvian artifact, one of maybe a handful of such artifacts in the known world. And it was perhaps buoyed up on somebody's body or got stuck in a, in a fork in a tree, and it landed in this coal, and it was preserved in this same coal layer there, Pennsylvanian coal there in West Virginia. It was mined, was brought to Newton Anderson's house, and he extracted it from the coal. And just a great example that man is older than coal.
Okay, let's see. Has the bell itself been examined by researchers?
Well, like I said, it was tested at the University of Oklahoma, and
Right.
it was they did a small shaving of it and put it in a mass spectrometer to determine what the metallurgy was.
Okay, let's see. Well, it turns out there are, as far as I can tell, there are, this is person. There are, in fact, explanations online that I can find as to why it was there. One of the explanations for it is an intriguing possibility is that the bell appeared to be in coal, but was actually in a concretion of coal slurry and coal lumps, hardened over time so that it appeared to be inside a contiguous lump of coal. Without documentary evidence from the time the story of the bell found in coal cannot be taken as evidence for young Earth. It is just too far. So is it possible that it was in the concretion of coal slurry and coal lumps and was hardened over time?
Yeah. Well, let me help you out with that. The skeptics would say that this is a Garuda bell. Garuda is a Hindu deity, and it's actually a winged being, and you do see a winged being here. And Garuda is the mount for Krishna, and so Garuda is supposedly what Krishna flies around on. And so the Hindus do make bells that have a vague resemblance to this. It also bears some resemblance to the Babylonian demon of the southwest winds. And also, it's not uncommon for the Egyptians to make ceremonial religious bells. And they have a female winged figure that they would even associate with the bells. So this type of a religious symbol is multicultural. It really exists across a number of different cultures. But the skeptics will point to that and they'll say, well, we think perhaps maybe some Hindu brought this from India, was meandering through West Virginia, somewhere around that time, lost it. It dropped into a crevasse. It fell into this crack into the earth and went down and hit onto some layer where coal is. And maybe over time, some erosion happened on the sides of that. And, it packed in there and it kind of got re-solidified down on the bottom there. And then the whole story is really far-fetched for a whole number of reasons. Number one, we're talking about the boondocks of West Virginia. And as Newton Anderson says, I didn't know of anybody who had ever been outside of West Virginia, amongst any of my circle, much less somebody from India. But number two, you're talking about coal country here. You're talking about a guy whose relatives are actually mining the coal. They're not going to take a sandy, solidified, leaves in it coal slurry and try to bring that in as a lump of coal to burn. I mean, A, nobody would buy that, and they bought this coal from this fella. And B, it just is horrible. I mean, it's not like this is lignite brown coal. This is bituminous, hard, black Virginia coal, and that's what they burn. They're not going to, burn some kind of a mixture that's barely hardened around this thing. So it's a stretch. Not only that, but we actually went down there. I did, and did some research along with another fella. And those of you that live in coal country, this. Some of the others might not. But the mining rights to land is a different title from the land rights. So you might own the land that's out back behind your house, but someone else might have the mineral rights for it. And so we were able to trace the mineral rights through titles, and find the location and go up there, and actually we found the mine itself where the coal was mined. And this is kind of important because in coal country there, you've got two major kinds of mining. You've got strip mining, where they would take off the overburden, and underneath they would reveal the coal layer, and of course they'd mine it out, and then they'd put the top dirt back again, and smooth over the land and plant some grass or whatever. And so that's strip mining or surface mining. The other type of mining might be the type that you're more familiar with, where you have a rock and you're going and you're putting a tunnel, a shaft into the mountain. And obviously this is because it's not anywhere near the surface, it's going into a cliff. And so it's much more economical to dig and burrow and go in. Then they'd often have like a train trolley or something that was then on tracks taking the coal out. And this, of course, is more dangerous in that you can have collapses and chunks falling down, and people can get hurt that way. So what's interesting, which kind of mine this was? It wasn't a surface mine. It was a shaft mine that was dug into a mountain. And so we traced where the coal came from that Newton Anderson bought, and lo and behold, what this guy was doing is he was working a shaft mine. And so what's the likelihood that a bell is going to get dropped? It's going to drop through hundreds of feet, solid rock, to end up in this coal. It's a really far-fetched scenario. I don't have enough faith to buy that kind of balloon.
All right. Well, I will have to do more research. Oh, there's an echo. Oh, it's gone now. Okay. I'll have to do more research on the bell itself, because that was not one of the articles that I did look over. I mostly focused on the Ica Stones article. I know already a bit about the Paluxy River tracks, which you mentioned, which I'd be happy to talk about also. And also
that probably deserves a whole session all its own too, doesn't it?
Not especially. I mean, all the tracks from Paluxy, or all the supposed human tracks, are found within dinosaur tracks.
That's not right.
They are. It's like I think Carl Baugh, I think, claimed there were like 16 of them or so, but there were only like 4 or 5, and they were all within ornithomimid tracks, showing that they were actually just partly eroded ornithomimid tracks. And let's see. Oh, yeah. So do you have a link to the study? Someone in the audience, Zune in the audience, made a good point. Do you have a link to the study from the university on the bell?
It was a study that was done by John Morris, who was at the University of Oklahoma at the time. So it's not like this was an official university study. This is merely an analysis that was done by a geologist, John Morris, at the university using the mass spectrometer. And yeah, he has had some articles that he produced.
John Morris. Okay, I find, let's see, Wikipedia. Okay. Well,
it may interest your viewers too, Jackson, to know that before I purchased this artifact from Newton Anderson, who's still alive and lives in South Carolina at this time, actually had him do a polygraph test. Now, hired the best polygraph examiner that I could. Does death row cases, and he does legal work all over the Carolinas and through the Mid-South. And I had him hook Newton Anderson up, ask him all the pertinent questions about, was this found encased in the coal? Was this the bell that you found? And really just verifying all the key points of the story in great detail. And the report, the polygraph examiner's report, is online at the genesispark.com website.
Okay. So guys, if you want to go there and read more about it, it's on his website, which I have links to, and I will provide in the description of this video, so you can go read more of his material afterwards.
Jackson, I hate to be the one in charge here, but I know our time is fleeting. Can we keep talking about the cryptozoological evidence? That's my favorite part, and I think it'll probably be of the greatest interest to your viewers, and maybe something we can even agree on as evolutionists and creationists, that it would be really, really neat to find a extant living dinosaur.
It would, in fact, be interesting. All right, which one do you want to discuss?
Well, there's two in particular that I think the odds are decent. One is the Mokele mbembe, which is a sauropod dinosaur, something like this Diplodocus that I'm holding here in my hands. It's nowhere near as large as the fossil record. I mean, you're talking whatever, 100 feet long monster reptiles. This is something that, according to the Pygmies in the Congo and in Cameroon, is somewhere between the size of an elephant and a hippo. And so, like many things, it is smaller and arguably de-evolved from its ancestors in the fossil record. But it's what we believe to be a sauropod dinosaur. And there have been reports going, back a number of decades, mostly from the Congo, of this Mokele mbembe creature. And the Smithsonian Center expedition, you have Roy Mackal from the University of Chicago, made multiple trips and wrote a book about it called Living Dinosaur. And then after the Congo descended into really chaos, civil war, you have the Marxist guerrillas, and very dangerous, most of the expeditions stopped at that point. And then in the late 1990s, a friend of mine named Bill Gibbons in Canada heard about reports from Cameroon. You have to understand, Cameroon and the Congo, they share a large border there, and the rivers run south from Cameroon down into the Congo swamps down there. And obviously these creatures don't care. They're going to swim up and down the rivers. They don't care about one country or another. And so these missionaries were working with the Baka Pygmies in the southeastern portions there of Cameroon. And they heard reports about an animal. Of course, they're doing translation work, and they're translating words like hippo and elephant, but then they hear these Pygmies talking about this creature, and it's slightly different. It's called Mokele mbembe in the Congo. It's called Likelebembe in Cameroon. So close, slight variations one people group to another. And but the Baka tells stories about this creature. And so in 2000, we really broke into some virgin territory and flew into Douala and Yaoundé. We rented a vehicle and took this four-wheel drive vehicle down through Yakadouma, which is a logging town, and down into the target area there, along these swamps, these river systems, and mostly the Bumba River. But the Bumba River connects to the Ja River, which connects to the Ngoko River. And so really the confluence of those rivers is the area that we were able to explore in 2000.
Okay. So I also know researchers who have repeatedly gone to the Congo, mostly studying bats and mice and rats. And of all the researchers I've heard go there, and there are quite a few, even I just here at LSU, who go down there to study. None of them have ever reported or brought pictures back or fossils or dung of matching a sauropod dinosaur. There's simply no hard evidence, nothing other than some anecdotal stories about the Mokele mbembe.
Well, let's talk about what evidence we do have. In the world of cryptozoology, that is the study of hidden creatures. Obviously, yeah, we haven't yet proved their existence, or it wouldn't be a cryptid, right? It wouldn't be cryptozoology, it would be zoology. So cryptozoology is what I do, and it is a scientific pursuit via observation of things like reports, tracks, scat, droppings, possible dens, various bits of scientific evidence. So this is kind of a detective work, really, right, trying to validate or falsify the evidence for the existence of some of these creatures. And cryptozoologists don't just chase, big exciting creatures like Mokele mbembe. They might chase a new plant species in a particular area. Or several years back, a new species of monitor lizard was discovered in the Philippines. I'd be talking several foot long, large reptile was discovered there that no one knew about. And yet there it was. And the native peoples told stories about this. Folks were skeptical. Then they found claw marks on the tree. And so, kind of followed through till they eventually discovered this thing. And lo and behold, a new species of monitor lizard there in the Philippines. When the early Westerners came to, the colonialists came to Africa, the same region there in equatorial Africa, and they heard the reports of a strange creature that was kind of half zebra and half giraffe, they laughed at the indigenous peoples, and kind of took a snooty, sort of an arrogant, condescending look at these peoples and said, well, what do you guys know, right? We're Westerns. We're really smart. We understand what creatures exist, and you guys have your mosaics and your composites and your fanciful stories here that just are not evidence as far as we're concerned. Well, I happen to think that the Pygmies there know an awful lot about the forest, and I was extremely impressed with them. It doesn't mean that they can't, come up with some fanciful stories. People groups do that, and so I'm not saying that it's by any means a proof of it, but it's a data point. And the creatures that I have on my website under the cryptozoological evidence, as opposed to the scriptural and the historical and the paleontological, are creatures that there's been multiple data points. So you might have indigenous people reports, you might have a sighting by a Westerner, you might have some tracks, you might have some carvings that are maybe very ancient that we don't even know who carved them, but they match up pretty good with some of our best fossil reconstructions of these types of creatures. So there are places I've been to. I've been to all of the places that are listed there on my cryptozoological evidence page. And this include places like the Amazon River Basin, places like Loch Ness, places like Nahuelhuapi down there in Argentina, places like Lake Champlain, which is just around the corner from me up here, Lake Okanagan out in British Columbia, Papua New Guinea, which we should probably talk about the roping creature that I believe is out there, and then also equatorial Africa here, where they talk about this creature Mokele Mbembe.
Okay. Okay. Well, as for the monitor lizard, I want to say on that, I have absolutely no problem with people finding new species. I mean, we just found a new species of orangutan over in the remote parts of Indonesia. The first new ape species found in 130 years.
It's a big world out there, Jackson. We got some stuff that we haven't, completely explored yet, and there's some pretty neat places that I've been.
That's why
you see some pretty wild stuff out there. Where I just was in Cambodia, I'll tell you, it was the most miserable hiking I ever did. Pouring rain, just slogging through mud. And, when the rain breaks, you got these hordes of malaria mosquitoes going in your face and sweat flies going up your nose and your ears and all over the place. And everything's soaking wet. And everything you touch either bites you or prickles you or stings you. But the worst of it was the tree leeches. These things were horrible. I mean, the Vietnam vets call it the green hell. And I'll tell you, we didn't face Viet Cong bullets, but I can see why. It was bad. These tree leeches would be out in the trail, and you see them kind of like this, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, there's 4, 5, 8, 9, 10 of them out there in the trail. And you take a few steps and they're crawling up your legs. You learn pretty quick to put your socks on the outside of your pants, so that at least they're crawling up the outside rather than the inside. But yeah, you take 7, 8 of them off one leg, and then you take 3, 4 off the other leg, and by the time you're done, there are 2 more jumped on the first leg, and it was nasty.
Oh my goodness, that does sound pretty terrible. But so I just want to reiterate that as of right now, what we have of Mokele Mbembe is anecdotal stories.
We've got pictures of nests. We've got pictures of footprints.
Pictures of nests.
Yeah, nesting sites, abandoned nesting sites. We've got pictures of tracks. We have a recording of a sound, which I'm about 50-50 on that one. Regusters recorded this sound in the Congo. Yeah, I've got it on my website. You can listen to it, see what you think. The the data point with the pygmies is actually more compelling than you might think. Where we went there in Cameroon, no outsider had been there at all. In fact, going down the Bumba River and stopping village to village to village, young kids would come up and they'd try to scratch your skin to see if the white paint could come off. I mean, they were just utterly astounded at these, ghostly white-looking people that had descended into their village. Never seen anything like it before. And so we would very carefully, very cautiously, build up some rapport with them. Then would start to ask them questions about alligators and, or not alligators, crocodiles and apes, the gorillas and various things. And we had a picture book. And what we'd do is we'd open the picture book and would show them pictures of things that they should know, hippopotamus and crocodiles and stuff. And then we'd flip to some pages of things that they shouldn't know, kangaroos and polar bears and things like this. And what are we doing? Well, we're testing their credibility. So I'm making the story short here, but we would go at length through crocodiles. Oh, what do the crocodiles eat? How long are they? Can you pace it off for us? Can you draw us a picture of what your crocodiles look like? And so on. And then we talk about the things they shouldn't know, and they'd kind of puzzle over them, and maybe they'd say, "Oh, get so and so," and some old man would come tottering out, and he'd come and he'd look at it, and they'd talk and find, "No, we don't know that one here," and next one, and they'd talk it over, and "No, we don't know that one," and then after several of these, you flip a page and show them a sauropod dinosaur, and it's black and white, so we don't have the color messing them up, and there's nothing around it, just just black and white there, with nothing to make the scale get thrown off. And it's, Mokele and Mbembe, consistently, village to village to village to village. This was what they knew. They could tell you how big it was. Some of them had never seen it. So it's not the least bit surprising to me that somebody from LSU that goes down there for whatever, a couple, 3 weeks or a couple of months doesn't see it. Some of these guys have lived their whole life right there where these creatures are, and they haven't seen it, but they're familiar with it. Others had seen it, and they could tell you about it. But it seemed to be very reclusive, so that when they're coming quietly in their dugout canoes with no motors, not a lot of noise, they're coming around the bend, they see the creature, and it very quickly submerges and goes under the water.
But if the Mokele Mbembe is out there, shouldn't there be a population of them?
Your guess is as good as mine. We could be dealing with the last few, and then it's going extinct. There could be a sizable population. I suspect there is. There've been these sightings in the Congo. There've been sightings in Cameroon. So I suspect that there is, but we're just really taking a wild guess at that point.
Okay. Well, it has been about an hour. If you want to wrap it up, are there any notes you want to add?
Well, the only other thing I would just add really quickly is this cool little creature here, which is a non-pterodactyloid. It used to be called rhamphorhynchoid pterosaur. That is, it has no head crest, and it has hopefully you can see that there. How's that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, and then and of course it has the long tail there. But this is a pretty compelling creature that supposedly lives in Papua New Guinea. I've been to PNG twice. Long flight from here. And we get on a little jungle airplane, and we drop in on a little jungle airstrip where these missionaries have been. And this is a creature that has been seen by missionaries, and it is a nocturnal creature with a large wingspan. The natives call it rope in there, and we believe it is an extant pterosaurian creature. Probably feeds on fish. It is got a very unique capability of bioluminescence, like a firefly or a glowworm or some of this underwater fish. And so it's really an extremely fascinating creature, not just because of the fact that it's a dinosaurian type creature that's probably still alive today in Papua New Guinea, but even some of its capabilities are really remarkable. And so again, I'd urge your viewers, if they'd like to learn more about this, go out to the website. There's an article there and under essays again entitled "The Fiery Flying Serpent." And I would say, along with the Mokele and Mbembe, this is a really good candidate for a extant dinosaurian, I say that in the vernacular sense, creature, a living pterosaur, possibly this rope in there in Papua New Guinea. I'd give it fairly high odds.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for coming on today, and I want to apologize again for being late to the show. But thank you for coming on.
My pleasure, Jackson. I've enjoyed it as well. It's good talking to you. All the best to you. Happy New Year.
Okay, thank you, and to you as well. And for everybody else who showed up, thank you for coming, and have a nice day.